Hello, everyone, and welcome to another fun episode of Conversational Witchcraft with me, Dawn the Kitchen Witch. Before we get going, I always have to remind you to make sure you subscribe to this channel. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the bell, hit the like buttons. If you're listening on Spotify, please know that you could support us by clicking the support us link and help us keep bringing you great information, inspiration, and magic. And also, fabulous conversations with amazing people from all over the world. Don't forget that you can learn more about me and visit me at cucinaaurora.com, learn about food magic, find my cookbooks, my oracle decks, and all about kitchen witchcraft at cucinaaurora.com. All right, without any further ado, today we have Joey Morris. Joey is a Celtic hedge witch, priestess of the Morrigan, author, creatrix behind Starryeyed Supplies, and the author of Celtic Hedge Witchery. Having shared a prolific amount of information around topics of paganism, Celtic Hedge Witchcraft via YouTube since 2012, Joey has been serving the pagan community with videos, books, sacred poetry, and physical witch items for over 10 years. Trained as a priestess, she has a unique perspective on integrating Celtic paganism for a modern age. Joey, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Hi, it's nice to be here.
I'm so excited to meet you. I'm always excited when we have people that are from overseas on the show. We haven't had too many, but it's always refreshing to get a perspective from people that don't live in America, especially right now, because America is kind of dumpster fire. And so like on behalf of us, I'm so sorry. We're we're
We're not much better over here, to
I
be
mean,
honest.
I promise you, we are not all assholes. I swear. A lot of us are really nice, but I'm really happy to have you. Now, where exactly are you in the UK?
Currently in Plymouth, which is sort of uh, near enough to Cornwall in the south of England, hoping to edge closer to Cornwall, to be honest. It's beautiful.
Is it real?
So
I've never been. I've never been there.
if you visit the UK, I highly recommend Cornwall because it's just it's beautiful. It's got the best beaches in the UK, and
Oh,
it has some really gorgeous standing stone circles and wild old places, and it has the Dartmoor moors near it. Oh, gorgeous.
I feel like there's so
Dartmoor
much.
moor, sorry. That's my
No,
brain.
no, it's fine. Like I said, I'm super cash. There's no relax. I feel like there's no comparison for, and again, I have not been to the UK. Okay. So
Mhm.
I speak only from the experiences I've heard from other people that have been there, but that the magic is palatable, that it is so different than from what we're used to here in the US in terms of the land and the ancient magics that live there. Would you say that's a true statement? Would you agree with that?
I think in certain places in the UK, absolutely. I think the more heavily Celtic places are the ones that I find to be the most beautiful throughout the UK. So Scotland and Wales, while still part of the United Kingdom, are obviously their own countries and they're gorgeous. Cornwall likes to think it's its own country. It's not technically, but again, it's gorgeous, and there is something much wilder like about those places, and you can definitely feel like the magic in the land and get lost for hours and things like that in places like that. Absolutely, yeah.
I always, and maybe this is a misconception, but I feel like here in America, my husband, he jokes and he says, you have to remember that Americans are people that were so uptight that the British kicked them out. It's like and his heritage on his dad's side is British, Scottish, like all of that.
Mhm.
But the ideas of magic and paganism and folk magic and those things for here, especially where we grew up actually in New York. So we're in New England now, but in New York, which is heavily Catholic and heavily, influenced by religion of, specifically like Catholic religions and Christian religions. These ideas of witchcraft or paganism or earth-based spirituality, they weren't things that we were exposed to as children,
Mm-hmm.
right? It was fairy tales only for us.
Mm-hmm.
The closest we ever got to that was learning a little bit, like tiny little bits. I can remember as a child learning tiny little bits about Native American spirituality, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that being like, oh, that, that doesn't exist anymore when you're a kid. That's kind of the message that you got, was like, oh, they used to do this and they used to do that. Where you are, was this sort of taught, and the ideas of witchcraft, paganism, magic, is it much more widespread? And so that as a child, this is not something that you're taught doesn't exist, or like how does that work culturally?
So the first thing to remember, I think, in the UK is the Christianity isn't anywhere near as prevalent. Like it's supposed to be the religion of the country, but for the most part, um, it's there is very little extremism in religion in the
Mm,
UK. The other thing about it is obviously that when people say Catholicism to me, and in the UK, there's no denying that the Catholics were kind of painting over the paganism because of those elements existed together.
yeah.
So you can't escape that in the UK so much. Whereas I think if you took pilgrims out of the UK to somewhere where the shrines, the standing stones, all of these things don't exist outside of where you took them from, you're sort of separating them from the proof that that is not how things have always been religiously. Growing up, it changed a little bit after I left school, but religious education taught all of the faiths.
Really?
Yeah. It was supposed to be religious education, not religious indoctrination. It was supposed to be you learn about different religions from all over the world.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know how it is now. It may have become less inclusive now. I'm not sure because it's been a long time since I was at school.
Right.
Um, but I know the education system in the UK is massively different from in America because I've had conversations with Americans before. And so English students are taught like critical thinking, they're taught to question what they're being taught, they're taught to argue with the questions, even. That's encouraged. You'll get like full marks for doing things like that. Whereas I know in America, quite often people have been penalized for doing that. You're not supposed to
Oh,
question what you're being taught.
oh, never, never.
Yeah.
You don't question, especially religiously,
Hmm.
right? Like, you don't, it is what it is. And if you go, well, hey, why? Or hey, that doesn't make sense, you get in trouble. And you are
Yeah.
taught, especially as a woman, don't ask a question.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I know that that has a massive difference from other Americans I've talked to. But there's things like when we were kids, we used to go on school trips and things. So I remember very vividly going to Lincolnshire Cathedral as one of the, we went on a school trip for a few days and stayed in a youth hostel or whatever it was as very young. We must have been very young. It must have been primary school age. So it must have been when we were about 10. And I remember maybe even earlier than that. But I remember being taught all about the gargoyles and the imps, the imp of the cathedral, who was like a spirit that had continued to exist even within the cathedral. So the cathedral had obviously been built on a pagan site, and legends of whatever this imp was in the first place survived and were
Mm-hmm.
carved into the. And they're teaching that; they're not ignoring it. So even from a very young age, there's no sort of separation, and I was exposed to loads of stories and loads of folklore, and um, I mean, I was also the generation where you look at the television and think, yeah. So it was like Worst Witch, Sabrina the Teenage
Oh,
Witch,
yeah.
Charmed, Buffy, all of it
Yes.
growing up, and you look back and you think, yeah.
Yes. Same, same, exactly. Where you're like watching these things and you're like, yeah, no, that makes sense to me. Oh, that's, but in,
Yeah.
here you're the weirdo, you're strange, you're discouraged from emulating,
Mm,
or discouraged from learning, especially in the 90s, like,
mm.
you're really discouraged from learning the history and the lore behind that within your families and within society. So like, what was your first, you can remember going, oh yeah, no, I'm a witch, or finding that first book or that first pull to the path?
So I've always been this way as far back as I remember. And my nana used to say that I used to talk to spirits when I was very, very little. And I would know things that I shouldn't know. And we saw that that was also the case with my nephew. Like he would talk to grandma and he knew what grandma, that plant used to belong to grandma. And he had no way of knowing that because he'd never met her in the physical realm. And apparently we were all like that as kids as well. And there's strange things from my childhood, like I knew how to use a pendulum age 7 with never being taught.
Wow.
So I literally took a silver, it had to be silver in my mind. So which past life this comes from, I don't know, but it had to be silver. And I drew a circle and it had to be 8 sections and wrote little things in and did a pendulum. And I look back and I'm like, no one ever taught me this that I remember anyway. And I was always big on storytelling. So we used to go on lots of like walks in woods and forests and parks and things like that. Um, and I would be sat there making up stories about things. And I was big into anything to do with animals and conservation.
Mhm.
I was very young wanting to save the rainforests and having no idea how to do that. And it upset, I think it was about 5. And I remember crying for hours
Mm.
because I didn't know how to save the rainforests. So I've
Yes.
always just been that way inclined from word go. Um, and I think I first dedicated myself to the path of a witch when I was 13.
Teen.
Yeah, and I was talking to the spirits about knowing that the spark inside me belonged to the earth, and I would walk the path of
Wow.
the earth. And bear in mind, at this point, I'd not read anything.
Wow.
And I did read everything I could get my hands on from sort of that point, but back then there was a lot less than there is now. It
For
was mainly
sure.
Wicca back in the day. Um, and I'm very thankful for those books on Wicca, but I vastly outgrew it quite quickly because it's quite confining. And
Yes, agree.
um, so I've definitely got this weird mixture of odd things I did as a child and have no real explanation for unless it's past life or
Yeah.
something to do on that level or just being very open. But I was fortunate in that I never really encountered any spiritual resistance from anybody. I was never indoctrinated by any religious stuff. And in fact, when I came across kids who were very religious, I used to argue with them like crazy. So I remember there was this one kid at school, and he was very Christian. And he was quite homophobic because of the religious stuff that he'd
Yeah.
been taught. And I remember him sitting there going, um, homosexuality is unnatural. And I looked at him and he had this face like, oh God, she's going to pick a fight. And I was like, right, here are some examples of homosexuality in nature.
Right.
I just
Penguins.
have this vivid memory of
Right.
me doing it.
Right.
Um, because I didn't like it. I don't like, I mean, I've never liked the idea of that anyone can tell you what to believe. I'm
Hmm.
like, believe whatever you like, practice whatever you like, as long as you're not hurting anyone else.
Yes. Yes. So in my life, rule number one is don't be a dick. And what
Yeah.
that mean what that means is it's not your job to tell other people how to live their life.
No.
Like, one of my big issues with my upbringing was that, as we talked about, like, you can't question anything. You can't find something on your own, or make your own decision for you. And my argument was always, especially around things like sexuality, or choice, for example. I was brought up really Catholic, and part of that was, God's greatest gift to humanity is free will. And I, as a kid, can remember going, well, if God's greatest gift to me is free will, which means I get to make my own choices, then my choices aren't bad because I
Mhm.
get to choose them. And if I don't want to choose your way and I choose my way, as long as I'm not hurting myself or anyone else, that shouldn't be a bad, like quote unquote bad. And it used to blow my mind. And that was such a fight to sort of break out of that closed mindset of not being able to explore until I became a young adult and was able to, like you said, there was a lot less information back then. You actually had to physically go to a shop and find a
Mhm.
book or physically
Mhm.
go to a library and find a book. You didn't have a phone where you could Google search something.
Yeah.
But do you think that this openness of your upbringing helped you to have those early magical experiences of communing with spirit and earth and all of that because you weren't being impeded energetically speaking or psychologically speaking?
Um, I know that a lot of my family members believe themselves to have certain spiritual gifts. I say with hesitancy, I don't have anything to do with my blood family anymore. They're not good people. But they did have all of them that I can remember did believe that they had certain spiritual gifts. So, for example, my mother believed herself to be clairaudient and she believed that she heard spirits. My father had psychic inclinations, and my nana saw spirits. And my grandmother, we don't have confirmation that she was into witchy stuff, but she had herbs hanging around in the kitchen all
Yeah.
year round.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we asked what were these for, and oh, well, I'll tell you when you're older. And she knew the names of all plants. Like, oh, I really wish she taught us as kids because I'm still catching up to that to this day. She taught my mother, who did not teach any of us, unfortunately.
Mm.
But you know, things thrived under her care. Like after she had gone, her garden was never the same. Um,
Wow.
and so she had Green Witch vibes completely.
Sure.
But yeah, that there's something in all of my relatives that I'm aware of that they believe they had some sort of spirit gift.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess because it was just not really necessarily talked about, but just kind of, in the lore
Yeah.
of the family, and just it just was.
Yeah.
So that side of things wasn't really questioned, and but I was very headstrong right from the start. So I've always been like very, very like I want to protect and defend women in
Mm-hmm.
particular,
Mm-hmm.
and some of that is my unfortunate experiences, and then some of that is just how I've always been.
Mm-hmm.
And so that comes into that religious discrimination thing again, because a lot of the religious discrimination is actually discrimination against women,
Oh yeah.
whereas like paganism, for the most part, and in most people, is not. It tends to be inclusive,
Yeah.
um, which is something I love about paganism.
It's one of the things that really drew me. And I say that I'm Dawn the kitchen witch because the basis of my practice is kitchen witchcraft. And I think that
Mhm.
that's just an easy concept for people to understand, but I would
Yeah.
identify as and use the terms pagan and witch interchangeably. And one of the things that really drew me to that path was that inclusivity,
Mhm.
right? That you can believe whatever you want. You can pray to this god or that archangel or work with these herbs or do, I could do a rune reading, but I can also work with the fairies. Like there's no rules. It's what works for you. So long as you're not hurting yourself or others, do what works for you. And
Mhm.
that was so appealing to
Mhm.
me as a young witch and a young woman. And going, wow, look at the freedom that I have in this particular lane. I can be, do, have, say, feel, believe, whatever it is that works for me as an individual and explore that.
Mm,
So how did you're now like a 13-year-old and you're like, okay, I'm gonna go down this path of witchcraft. How did you
mhm,
take that sort of exploration from like you said, there was a lot of Wicca at the time. How did you take that exploration over the course of being a teenager and then a young adult
mhm.
into the practice that you have now where you're kind of this expert on Celtic Hedge Witchery, which, and we're going to talk about the book again after we get on the break, but I'm curious, like, how do you make that leap to go from you know 13-year-old, I'm a witch, I'm dedicating myself to the earth, I'm going to be a professional witch? Like, what happened in between there as you were growing up?
Life. So,
Right,
yeah.
fucking life, right?
So Celtic Hedge Witchery is again like a little bit like you said with the kitchen witchery. It's a label. It's the closest label. It's
Yeah.
not necessarily the entirety of the story. I never liked labels very much, but it's kind of like, well, if you're going to write books and you need a label, and I was like,
Right. Crap.
okay. Um, and so Celtic Hedge Witchery is kind of the closest to it because, as I mentioned, spirits and spirit work has always been a thing. It's been with me right since the very beginning. And it's just the book and my practice are just kind of, they've grown from experience. From being a teenager, I read a lot as a teenager. I read everything I could get my hands on before I started practicing. And I'm not saying that's the right or wrong way to do it. And I don't know whether this is incredibly Virgo and of me, but my Virgo ass was like, read everything before we start, like everything we can possibly get our hands on. And then but of course, because I have that, I can question the texts because that's the UK education system. You do get to a point and you're thinking, that bit's not for me so much.
Yeah.
I don't like that bit. Why don't I like that bit? Okay, what are some other options? And then you do get to a stage where you are starting to look at mythology and history and
Yeah.
folklore and things like that because the books aren't necessarily giving you enough because a lot of books are obviously tailored at beginners
Yeah.
because that's where the money is. And obviously, there are more people coming into the beginner stage than there are at the later levels because some people come in, they do the beginner stuff, it's not for them, and they leave. But,
Mhm.
and then some of us, it's for life. This is who we are. So
Right.
it's just kind of been a natural evolution of my path and things that I think are still true about me and things that I'm still very invested in. Big love of nature, complete love of nature, obsessive about trees. I can't fully explain to you why, but trees. Yeah.
I no, you
And
I understand the tree thing. 100% I understand the tree thing. I am not um opposed or it's not surprising if I am outside just we have these two giant apple trees in my backyard and I will literally just go outside and hang out with them.
hmm
I'm like, "Hey, let's
yeah,
have a conversation. Let's
yeah,
talk." One of them I
yeah.
call the mother and the other is the grandmother tree because one of them is much older and she's much wiser. She just has a lot of information. So I get it. I get it
hmm
about the trees.
hmm
100%. And again, I imagine like in places that are older, the land has so much more wisdom, right? So
hmm
again, I grew up in New York, specifically in a part of New York that's very cookie cutter suburban, what you would think of a suburban American town, right? Like
hmm
every house looks the same, every yard is manicured. There's nature, but it's not like it's manufactured, right?
hmm
And then we moved to New England and there's wild hillsides and mountains and just everything growing and it's so much more alive. Um, and that feeling of the wisdom of nature is so much more palatable. It's so much more real, and you can just kind of sink into it. And again, I can't think of a place that that I've been to besides New England. Maybe the West Coast feels like that as well, but I imagine that's exactly what you mean when you say like you're obsessed with trees.
Hmm. Yeah. I think New England's quite similar in to some parts of the UK, if I'm thinking rightly. Like the landscapes have a bit of a similarity in certain places. But yeah, the trees. Yeah.
Trees. Yes,
Mm,
exactly.
trees. Yeah.
Trees. Okay, let's take a quick break. Let's hear from our sponsors. And when we get back, um, I really want to talk to you about your book, Celtic Hedge Witchery. There's so much to unpack in this book and in your practice of Celtic Hedge Witchery. So we'll take a break and we'll be right back. We are back on Conversational Witchcraft with Joey Morris. Okay, Joey, let's talk about this awesome book, Celtic Hedge Witchery. And I'm so excited because I do have a copy of it for those of you that are watching the video. If you're not watching the video, you should go look it up because I know you're not supposed to judge a book by its cover, but this cover is so beautiful. Like,
Hmm. I
right? It's
know.
so beautiful. It really does pull you in to the magic of your work here. So first of all, for people that don't know, explain hedge witchery.
Okay. So, in traditional terms, hedge witchery is literally at a hedge. So, for people who are not sure about what hedges are, because it's apparently a very quintessentially UK-based thing, which I didn't realize for a while, um, hedges are sort of a mixture of bushes and trees and things that have been grown into like a living fence, and they're usually found at the edge of between woodlands and farmland is where you often find them. But they're this fascinating, almost like little ecosystem that have been half cultivated by mankind and half from nature, but it's not like a forced thing, like they're grown into hedgy walls sort of thing, and they are really wonderful for the birds and nature life around those fields and things like that.
Mhm.
So that's what a traditional hedge is. And hedge witches were those that went to these hedges and performed magic. And there's this thing called jumping the hedge, which some speculate they were doing physically, but the idea of that is sort of traveling astrally outside of one's body to go on journeys into the underworld or to shapeshift into a hare and go running about the fields, depending on what folklore you're reading. Um, so that's the physical version of what hedge witchcraft is, and a lot of books and a lot of work was focused around that. But I kind of wanted to move us a little bit into modern times and suggest that you don't have to have access to a physical hedge. And what if physical hedges existed in the realm of spirit and what I call the spiritual ecosystem? Because in my mind, hedges were probably originally the edges of these ancient forests, which no longer exist.
Mhm.
So originally, that's what a hedge might have been, like these borders between these ancient forests and civilization. And ancient forests, right? People used to be scared of them. There were places
Sure.
of magic. There were places of folklore. There were places, scary, scary places, because they're much wilder than they are today and much more expansive. So I think that energetically, the imprint of those places in the spirit realm still exists. So those hedges still exist.
So
So,
the hedge idea of a, as you said, the spiritual landscape or the magical landscape being that hedge being sort of the borderline
hmm
between our world and the magical world or
hmm
the energetic even portal,
hmm
right? I think that's a really cool way to define it because you do hear that phrase tossed around, hedge witch, hedge witch, hedge witch.
hmm
And we've heard different definitions of, oh, well, a hedge witch is somebody that works, with nature. But what does that mean? A hedge witch is somebody that works this or that. What does that mean? So I think that using that term to define the kind of that portal that do I want to use the word boundary? Because boundary state feels like it keeps the magic out of our world.
Well, I mean, hedge witches leap over boundaries all the time. I think it
Mhm.
depends, again, how you feel about it's all words and interplay with words, isn't it? I think boundary can work for different ways because technically, sometimes when you're creating a boundary, it's to fill something within it. It's not necessarily keeping things out. So
Mm.
sometimes when we're casting circles to make our own little sacred inner grove energetically within it, that's a container. But it doesn't have to necessarily be prohibitive. Um, so it's a liminal space, maybe.
Love
Maybe
that.
the sort of liminality of it is a way of thinking about it that can be helpful. Yeah.
So now we have an understanding of what the hedge is.
Hmm.
Now talk to us about the Celtic part of this, because that's really interesting how you are combining the Celtic paganism with
Hmm.
modern hedge witchery.
Hmm. So as you guys have probably told, I obviously have that's where my basis comes from, right? That's the land that I'm living in. That's the stories that surround me. That is very much an integral part of who I am. And the
Mm.
book is largely a bit of a love letter to my path as it has evolved. But there's also these really fascinating crossover points with Celtic stuff. And what it really focuses on for me is like the symbol of the Triskel, which is a really ancient symbol. Um, the three realms, as are present in Celtic tradition, which is land, sea, and sky, and how that crosses over into the three realms, which is often found in hedge witchery generally. So, hedge witches in general will talk about upper, middle, and lower realms of existence, and they might cross it over with the parts of the self or parts of the soul and things like that. So, that moves it into that spirit work side of things. You might also hear, and I talk about this a lot, the three cauldrons. So that's from the Celtic poem, the Irish poem, Cauldrons of Poesy from the 7th century. And that's a sort of Celtic alternative to chakras, sort of. It's energy centers, one in the head, one in the heart, and one in the stomach, which are cauldrons. Which,
Mm.
as a witch, I'm like, yes, give me
Yes,
all the
please.
cauldron
Yes,
symbolism.
please.
Yeah. And for me, those sort of line up with the three realms, right? So you have your cauldron of wisdom in your head, realm of sky, everything to do with that. Then you have your cauldron at heart space, your cauldron of motion, realm of land. Cauldron in your stomach, realm of sea, cauldron of warming. And so there's all this fascinating ideas around the souls of human beings and how spirit works within human beings. But for me, I sort of was like, what if on a Triskel, so a Triskel, for anybody who doesn't know, is the Celtic symbol you will probably come across at some point. It's kind of like a triangle in the middle with three sort of spokey wheels around coming off each branch. And for me, those three spokey wheels represent the realms, land, sea, and sky. And we can find ourselves in the center of it. And I was like, well, what if the hedge represents those three lines?
Mm. Mm.
So as
Wow.
we leap over the hedges, we can find ourselves in different realms of existence that are connected to land, sea, and sky. And the other
Wow.
world, which is upper, middle, and lower. So it's all sort of taking what has been said in mythology, folklore, and looking at it, examining it, experiencing it, playing with those ideas. Because I often do it where I'm ruminating on the idea of what if this is the case, and what often happens is I'm spiritually downloading.
Yes.
And then it's kind of like, right, let's play with that and see how that works and see what that does. So for me, something that I do a lot, and I think this is the easiest way to access it, is I imagine the cauldron of motion at heart space. I go down into it,
Mm.
and then coming up out like at the other end of a tunnel, you come out in a giant cauldron in the middle of your inner sacred grove. And your inner sacred grove is something that you can access within yourself at any point. You don't have to be anywhere in the world. You can do it no matter where you are. And it's yours. It's your inner sanctum, your inner safe space, your inner grove. And it can grow and change as you do. And you can influence it. So if you fancy bringing a plant spirit into that space, and you're meditating with that plant, and then you're like, I would like to plant this little plant spirit in my space for protection, you can totally do that in a meditative way. And so all of this sort of like Celtic knowledge and connection in the spirit realm really excites me when it comes to hedge witchery.
Wow. I've never heard it put in these terms before. I love this idea of the three realms. In fact, um, as I said before, I only recently got the book a few days ago. So I haven't had the chance to read the whole thing as I normally would. I was only able to kind of like go through a couple of sections. And the part that I went through was the three realms, and I literally wrote down, let's talk about the Celtic realms. So like I'm really excited that that's where this conversation has wound up.
Witches.
Which is who thought? Is there one of these realms that for you resonates more, or do you find that um they resonate when you need these particular energies?
Mm. So, Realm of Land, Sacred Grove is the go-to for me. I will say, I think the sea is absolutely terrifying personally. When you sit and think about the ocean, I think the ocean is terrifying because we don't know what's down there. And, and according to all Irish mythology, all life started in the sea and all life will end in the sea. And I'm like, I can believe it.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
we don't know what's down there. We know less about it than we do about space. This is weird and
true.
terrifying given that this exists on our planet.
And in this,
Um,
in the realm, the magical realm, like that
mhm,
that realm of sea, does it have to be? This is because when I'm working with water, when I'm working with
mhm,
the water element, I never, in my magical work, I never go to ocean. I go
mhm.
to lake. I go to river. I go to stream. Do those count in
No.
this? No, they don't.
I
It.
would say you are in land, you are still
I'm
in
still in
land
land. I'm not
because you
in.
are in safe, enclosed
Yes,
spaces of water. Yeah.
not
So
in ocean.
the if you are going down into your cauldron of warming, which I don't tend to do, and I don't tend to take people there because that's connected to the underworld, death, rebirth, and ancestors. So unless you're in the primordial soup, I don't think you're deeply connecting into the realm of sea. And the times that I have done that have been terrifying.
Yeah, yeah.
And it is about shadow work and it is about, having no control and all the rest of it. Because you find yourself out in the middle of ocean with no help, you're not going to live, are you? Not going to last. Like there's no chance. We do not belong in the ocean.
Right.
We
We
have
came
not.
out of the ocean like
Yeah.
we for a reason. If
Yeah.
we were meant to swim, we would have gills. Okay, that's
And
just
and I have mad respect for the ocean. I completely respect it, but at the same
Mhm.
time, I'm like, we cannot survive in it.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Wow. So that is a place that you magically don't go to unless you need to, or like you said, if you're
If
in a
we,
time of transformation
yeah,
and you need to do magical work and you gotta sit in the shit, right?
yeah,
As we often have to do,
yeah,
you might have to go into that scary place so that you can emerge,
yeah,
right? But
yeah.
that's not a place that you feel super comfortable and called to.
No, and it's weird because the underworld, like, so the three realms are slightly separate, right? So the upper, middle, and lower realms. So the spirit world, the underworld going down, is where a lot of witches feel quite comfortable.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that this discrepancy but I feel like when we experience the underworld, that's still earthy though, isn't it? I don't know about anyone else, but when I visit the underworld, I'm looking up at the roots of trees in caverns. So I'm like deep, deep, deep within the earth.
Mm.
So it's just in the bowels of the ocean. It it's not like I won't go there. I will go there. There is deep mystery and deep magic there, but at the same time, if you're not having a very good time in life, don't do it because that it's about being surrounded by shadow. It's about being surrounded by death. It's about and being surrounded by things that we don't fully understand, I think.
Mm.
Um, And whereas we can tap into that a little bit in our other realms, so we
Mhm.
can tap into that energy when we're in sacred grove space, we can absolutely do the water with lakes and rivers and things in that sacred
Mhm.
grounded space. It's almost like there is no grounding in the realm of sea because there isn't.
Mhm. Absolutely.
You're
Absolutely.
floating in
Yeah,
the dark
or drowning.
or
Or
drowning. Yeah.
drowning. If you're
So
lucky, you're floating, right?
yeah, if you're lucky. Yeah.
If you're
But
lucky.
yeah, I will say as well, like the animal versions of what happens in the ocean are often quite terrifying.
How do you mean?
So for me, I connect the three realms with Morrigan work as well. So for example, Cauldron of Wisdom in the Sky, I get a lot of crow energy from the Morrigan in that. So in the ocean, it's eels,
Oh,
big ancient ancestral eels that are massive.
that scare the shit out of you.
Yeah.
Terrifying.
And I call these in, and Eel's hilarious though, to be honest, because Eel comes in without me calling him, and I'll just get this massive eel just smacks energetically on top of my head, and I'm sat here like because when you call in, like I call in the three realms instead of like the elements or whatever,
Hmm.
so I will call in a guardian from the realm of sky, call in the guardian from the realm of earth, and Eel doesn't even wait, thunk, and
Hello, I'm here. So if you were doing this kind of work or you're obviously this is in your book, but where would someone start in these three realms? What would you suggest if someone wanted to explore this idea of these three realms of the Celtic Hedge Witch? Where would one want to start?
Well, firstly, always start with protection work, no matter what you're doing. And if you're doing spirit realm work of any kind, I always suggest backpedal a little bit. You want to make sure that you can ground yourself properly and return properly. You want to make sure that you're protected for any spirit work you're doing, and it will depend what kind of spirit work you're looking to do. If you're looking at going into your internal realms and things like that, that's safer than projecting outwards. That's safer than jumping the hedge. So going into yourself and experiencing the realms through yourself is inherently, in my mind, safer because you are in your vessel. You're not leaving your vessel at any point. You're self-contained, and it's easier to come up through your own body
Mhm.
than it is to come back from outside back into your own body. But there's still a little danger associated with it because if you know, again, if you're not mentally secure and you don't have anybody looking after you, which is what a lot of people suggest when you're first learning things like shape shifting or spirit journeying or spirit work, that you have someone else keeping an eye on you, right? So if that's not possible, I would say stick till you have done it a few times to your inner sacred grove, right?
Right, right,
Because in the realm of earth and in your inner sacred grove, you are held, you are protected, and you are safe. That's
right.
the entire point of a sacred grove, is it's the mixture between spirit communication and safety because you are surrounded, right? You're surrounded by a grove of trees. So you're in a
Mhm.
circle in yourself
Mhm.
at all times. And it tends to be mostly sacred grove work to begin with is tree and plant work anyway. So nature spirits
Mhm.
that are very willing to work with humans. Um,
Mhm.
and if you're doing that internally as well as externally, so obviously you can go and visit plants and trees in the external world and get to know them. But if you're doing it internally, that still tends to be the safer place to start. But always, also make sure that you know how to banish anything if it doesn't feel right. Learn to trust your own intuition.
Mhm.
Spirit work is quite advanced, really. And so you want to make sure that you take all the steps before you get to the more advanced stuff.
Mhm. Yeah, always take care of yourself. Don't this is the deep end. You know,
Hmm.
you need to wade in, you need to, be be careful with yourself because you could actually hurt yourself in these spirit realms. I mean, like emotionally and spiritually, or you could have a bad experience and not want to go back. So you need to wade into this kind of work. This
Hmm.
is not necessarily something that is, hey, I'm just starting my witchcraft journey and I'm going to journey to the three realms tomorrow cuz that sounds like fun. Like this is take a
Hmm.
minute, read the book, get your steps in order, make sure that you're doing things slowly, right? To learn what works for you,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Absolutely. Um, there was something else in the book that caught my eye, that I really wanted to just touch on, which was wildcrafting,
Hmm.
right? So I think we see a lot of things that would be considered wildcrafting that is not, that we're not using that term for, or that we're not looking at it as witchcraft,
Hmm.
because it is just something that people are doing in their own lives without the intention of it being witchcraft. So talk to us a little bit about wildcrafting, and what that word means to you.
Hmm. So wildcrafting, I guess if you were simplifying it, it's a bit like harvesting plants and things in the wild is the action that you are taking. But you are doing it in an ecosystem. So you're being aware that a plant has a spirit, you're aware that it has life force, and that it's giving of itself. You're going in considering it to be sacred, and to be an energetic exchange, when you're doing something like wildcrafting. So a lot of plant spirits are quite happy to work with humans and be harvested. There's this kind of like natural cycle of life, and so, there isn't a resistance to it. But when you go in with the sacredness of it, you're making sure of a few different things. So you're aware that it's an ecosystem and a spiritual ecosystem. So on an ecosystem level, you don't want to be over harvesting, which is a problem, that human beings have, that they just go in and take whatever they want without thinking about it. And you're thinking, right, I need a little bit of this wild mugwort, for the spiritual spell purpose you want, or perhaps you're using it for like a herbalism reason. So there could be like you're creating a balm with it. You could be creating teas and tinctures with it, things like that.
Mhm.
So you want to know all of your physical things, making sure there's nothing on those plants that's going to be dangerous to you. So it starts off on a very physical, mundane level. But then you're also taking it to a witchy level. You're aware that the plant has spiritual properties and can help with
Mhm.
psychic senses and help you with lucid dreaming and things like that. So you are going, and I would say the first two times that you go to a place, you're not harvesting. You're going to develop a relationship two or three
Mm.
times, with that plant, and you're sort of interacting with it the same way that you would introduce yourself to a human being. You're getting to know the plant a little bit. You're sitting with it, you're observing it, you're making sure it's healthy. It's I mean, mugwort's pretty good for harvesting because there's usually tons of it. It usually thrives. In strange places as well. In the UK, it thrives by the sides of roads. Um,
Yeah.
Mugwort does not care. Um, but you are going and you're communicating with that spirit, and you're also going and making sure it's okay to be harvested, that it's happy. And I think the best way of feeling that is just listening and feeling in intuitively. So if
Mhm.
it feels like a no, leave it alone. If you're
Mhm.
not sure, leave it alone. um, but
Wow.
generally, plants they work with humans. Most plants are okay. You might find an angry tree.
You might. You
You
might find.
might.
I think this is I think this is a really cool way of talking about this idea of wildcrafting. So for me as a kitchen witch, I think about wildcrafting and I think immediately my brain goes to foraging.
Hmm.
I think about, I have friends that go mushroom foraging.
Hmm.
And I unfortunately don't have the time and knowledge to do things like that, but I definitely know a lot of people that uh do mushroom foraging, or they do wild herb foraging, or things like that. And I also, and have done, I know people who do, and I have done what I might consider wildcrafting, which maybe is the wrong term, is finding items that have been discarded by nature
Hmm.
and collecting them for spell work, or um, to make something crafty for my home, or to give as a gift, or to work into some sort of a ritual. So going out into the woods and finding sticks or things that have been left behind, or stones that have been left behind, or collecting acorns to make a centerpiece in my kitchen. Would that also be considered wild crafting if it is done with that same respect and intention?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think so. I think wildcrafting is probably a really nice umbrella term, to be honest,
Mm-hmm.
that covers a lot of these things. So technically, what I described it is like a foraging, like a wildcrafting
Mm-hmm.
foraging, and then you can have your wildcrafting creating, and it does create kind of like an umbrella term around those things. But yeah, absolutely, I would include that.
I
Yeah.
think that is a beautiful way to begin, especially for people that maybe are starting out and going, wow, hedge witchcraft seems like something really interesting to me. When you're going out and you're collecting or you're foraging, or you're wild crafting, as you said, building the relationship with the land, with the plants, and going back to that place each time.
Mhm.
Would you agree that that's a great way to begin?
Yeah, absolutely. And always leave something in energetic exchange. That's something that I haven't mentioned actually. And I would say leave something which is not going to harm the ecosystem because you get a lot of people being like, oh, leave this crystal and leave this thing. I'm like, it doesn't belong there. If
Mm,
nothing else, give your breath, give your time, give your attention, maybe a little song, maybe a little conversation, something that
mhm.
costs you nothing and isn't harming the ecosystem.
I
So,
love that idea of giving back something, especially if you often we only give back when we've taken.
mhm.
I love the idea of creating offering, giving offering to earth or fairies or spirit when we don't want anything, right? Like you said earlier, it's about building that relationship,
Mhm.
right? As if you were building a relationship with a person. But if you were in a
Mhm.
relationship with a person and they only gave you a gift or they only did something nice for you when they wanted something, you'd be like, that guy's a dick. I don't want to
Mhm.
hang out with that person. They're only nice to me. They're only, everything's conditional with them. So if
Yeah.
I'm building my relationship with earth or spirit or whatever, I want to give of myself, of my energy, of my intention when I'm not getting anything back, just as a thank you for being you. I appreciate you. I appreciate Earth.
Mhm.
And sometimes what I do, this is, I can't believe I'm telling you this. I don't even know if I've told anybody this ever. I'll run my fingers through my hair and collect, I have long hair and it's always shedding. And so I'll collect pieces of my own hair and
Mhm.
leave that for the earth and the birds and whoever is going to
Mhm.
make a nest out of that and go, this is a piece of me that I
Yep.
willingly leave behind
Mhm.
for you, you
And
know?
that's life force. So what you're
Right.
doing is you're giving a little bit of your life force, a little bit of yourself
Mm-hmm.
into that ecosystem. So it's interesting because it's not only that you're giving of yourself, but it's also saying that you belong out there with them because then you're a part of that ecosystem. So
Right.
that's lovely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm so happy. Like again, I just do it because it feels right. So
Hmm.
it's nice to hear. And I think it's important for people to understand that when we say leave an offering,
Hmm.
you don't have to go out there with buckets of food. You don't have to go out there with, like you said, things that don't belong, like crystals or,
Hmm.
shiny objects. I have left shiny objects for the fairies.
Hmm.
I have, or the crows. I have left those things. But it does not have to be big and complicated.
Yeah.
You can leave a bit of yourself that is as simple as pulling a hair off your own clothing and put that
Hmm.
leaving that right and
Yeah.
and the response, the reciprocity of that giving and receiving, I think is incredibly important when we're working this kind of
Yeah.
magic.
This reminds me of a story, and I think it's really important because there was a lady that came to me and she had moved to an area and she said, I feel like I'm not welcome in this area. And I've
Mm,
given offerings to the trees and the woods. And she was talking about the area. And I sort of said to her, did you give an offering to the spirits of the mountain?
mm,
And she went, oh God, no, I didn't think about the mountain having a spirit. And I was like, I think the mountain might be more ancient than any of it, darling. Like, that might be the thing. And
right.
so sometimes when you're in an area, you feel like there's a hostility in nature because
Mm,
the spirits are so used to humans coming in, destroying everything, and not being in ecosystem, in relationship. So sometimes you're actually healing the land and the spirits of the land by doing these sorts of things
Mm,
anyway. So before you're even thinking about taking anything, and maybe you're not thinking of taking anything in the immediate future, but you're giving of yourself, you're giving time, attention, and awareness, and saying this is wrong. And like I said, I've met angry tree spirits because human beings have gone in there, pulled, torn their branches, spray painted on them, this, that, and the other.
mm,
So often, as witches and as hedge witches and witches in general, we go in and we caretake for nature. We litter pick, we clean the trees up, we help them to prune off branches that have half been torn down so they can heal and grow properly. And a lot
mhm.
of that is what it means to be a witch, which is seeing that nature is not just deserving of respect, but like we're not above it, we're a part of it and caring about it. And so sometimes these simple acts of giving of yourself, it can just heal the spirits of the land as you're going along. And it's important.
It is important. I feel like that kind of sums up everything, right? Is give give of yourself to nature and you will find that common ground, and from there you can build this spiritual practice where you can go to the three realms, where you can work with spirit, you can work with earth, you can do all these other things, but that foundational understanding, that relationship that you have with life force energy coming from the earth, we cannot deeply explore or understand if we're not willing to share it. If we
Mhm.
only want from it and we're not willing to give to it, we can't fully do any type of witchcraft,
Yeah.
right? Oh, that's fabulous. Joey, you are wonderful. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today, and teaching me about hedge witchery and the three realms and wildcrafting. This has just been so great. And as we're sitting here, I can't help but look outside. And I must tell you, right when we started this conversation, a hummingbird flew right up to my window and then went
Oh,
away. So I only see hummingbirds when the fairies are really excited. Maybe four times a spring I see hummingbirds. So he flew right up to my window, hovered for a minute, and flew away. So I
oh,
want you to
that's
know that was
exciting.
very special, very, very special today. Joey, tell us where we can find you online, how we follow you, and where to buy your amazing book, Celtic Hedge Witchery.
So the Celtic Hedge Witchery is available just about everywhere where books are sold. But you can come to my store, which is starryeyed and I ship to the UK and to America and not to Europe at the minute, but most other places. And you can have whatever you like from the store as well as the book. So you can find all my books on there if you so wish. It's a bit of a hub on there as well, so that can be helpful. But if you want to follow me on Patreon, it's Celtic Witch Coven, and we talk about all of these sorts of Celtic ideas and expand what is known because there's not a whole lot on some of the ideas. So, like the three cauldrons, there's not much written about it. So, we're constantly playing around with how we can utilize that in our witchcraft. So, if that sort of thing interests you, that's Celtic Witch Coven on Patreon.
Amazing. And we'll put all of your links in the show notes so people will be easy to find you and follow you online. And I know you have a thriving YouTube as well. So
Mhm.
everyone go in and check out Joey Morris. Okay, Joey, one final question. And I ask this to everyone that comes on the show. Okay. I am a kitchen witch. So if you could have me cook one magical meal for you, what would it be and why?
Oh. Anything with dandelion in it, because dandelion is my plant spirit ally of choice, and I adore it on a level which it makes me emotional. I adore dandelion so much, and you can do so much with it. So I think you could totally do a whole meal with dandelion.
Okay, so that's really special for me because I have vivid memories of going out into the garden with my grandmother, my little old Italian grandmother, and no one in my life has ever, ever, ever requested or even known like that you could eat dandelion. But my grandmother and I would go out into the yard and we would pick dandelion greens and we would come in the house and saute the dandelion greens with olive oil and garlic and make an omelet out of it. And that was like a special thing that I would do. So that's like ancestral magic for me to
Hmm.
make a beautiful dandelion omelet, you know. And I would like, for you, I would turn that into like a meal, and I would make like a big quiche and a big breakfast and make it like a whole thing. But wow, dandelion. I am so amazed that that's the thing that you picked. I love it so much. Wow. Joey, thank you so much for being here. This was so delightful. Really, 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 thank you so much. And I look forward to diving further into your book, Celtic Hedge Witchery.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. It was awesome.
It was wonderful to have you. Thank you so much. And until next time, everyone, I wish you so many blessings and much, much gratitude.